As the world changes around us, sometimes it's hard to believe that 10 years have already passed. But here we are, celebrating a decade of Bitwise Industries, a decade of hard work, innovation, and community building. A decade of bringing tech education and opportunities to the underserved.
Between 2013 and 2020, Bitwise Industries, Fresno's self-proclaimed mothership of technology education, collaboration, and innovation, had expanded from one cramped building to 3 larger buildings across the city's downtown to house a roster of tenants in technology and other fields, and to provide technology training to a diverse range of students.
Jake Sobero, an ambitious young attorney and software engineer, Irma Olgian Jr., believed that technology startups could diversify the region's business landscape and that training would-be tech workers could feed the local industry.
We have a lot of underserved and overlooked talent in the heart of the state, and we have been able to prove folks coming from that story are just as likely to succeed in the technology industry and help us rebuild this economy as anyone else.
Bitwise Industries is a technology ecosystem that is designed to make it possible for cities like Fresno and Bakersfield to participate in the opportunity that exists in the technology industry. And what that looks like is providing a ramp into the industry for the people in that city.
But in the early 2020s, as the company sought to expand its presence in California to Bakersfield, Merced, and Oakland, and to other cities across the U.S., some insiders began to question the financial viability of the operation. Or, to put it another way, the math doesn't lie.
$1 million, why would they take that salary? Why didn't they put that back into the company? And then hearing that some of these people that were their friends and family weren't even here and they were on payroll, and everybody said it. They were like, oh, these people are on payroll and they're not here. They're not working. And so to me, what is that? That's what is it called?
Nepotism?
Yeah.
I'm Bob Rodriguez.
I'm Tim Sheehan, and this is the story of Bitwise and Betrayal, inside the fraud scandal that shook Fresno. Fresno developer Will Dyke became involved with Bitwise Industries first as a development partner in the rehabilitation of several old Fresno warehouses into office spaces for Bitwise tenants and its own programs, and later as a member of the company's board of directors. As a board member for a couple of years, in the late 2010s, Dyke and 2 other directors had concerns about Bitwise's business model, which focused more on recruiting investors and emphasizing its social enterprise vision of training and uplifting people from historically disadvantaged demographics, rather than revenue-generating business practices. There was a clear divide between the capitalists on the Bitwise board and the Bitwisers, leading to disagreements on how the company should operate.
The early warning signs were there, not of what it became, but rather the business model did not seem like something that was sustainable. And there was a big divide in the board at the time. So at that period of time in 2018, we had the 3 capitalists in the room, as we refer to ourselves, that came from the business world, and then you had the 4 Bitwisers. And so we were the underdogs because we were outvoted on everything, and Bitwise was going down a path of putting the social enterprise in the forefront and the business enterprise in the back seat.
The Fresno Bee reached out to both Jake Soberall and Irma Olguin, asking if they'd be willing to be interviewed for this podcast. Neither of them responded. Here's Irma Olguin as the company announced its nationwide expansion plan.
That's right, $27 million new dollars. We started Bitwise in 2013, thinking that we could use the technology industry to fix the city. And we've had a lot of success in that in the last 6 years. But this raise will enable us to sort of double down on what's working and for the first time consider what it might look like to expand to another place.
To a businessman, that's not sustainable. It's great that they could do all the things that they were doing and they were changing people's lives and they were involved in amazing things, but without a business model to sustain that, to the growth, the outreach, the things they were spending capital on, it's not sustainable long term.
Dyke's role as a board member was short-lived, and he and other like-minded board members were consistently outvoted by Bitwise's founders. The trio that Dyke called the capitalists eventually left the board when institutional investors came in.
So they really, at the very beginning, should have probably been organized as a nonprofit and sought third-party funding as opposed to trying to create a business engine that would sustain it. And that was the chasm of 2018. And when the Series A financing came in and these institutional investors wanted board seats, the other two capitalists, they cashed their shares in and walked away. And at that time, I resigned from my board seat, and I've never been involved in any of the operations after that.
One of the concerns for Dyke and even some Bitwise employees was the company's penchant for offering management salaries that were well above the market for the Fresno area, and for nepotism, hiring friends or family members to serve in high-profile, high-paying roles, often with little or no experience in their area of responsibility. Prior to its meltdown in May 2023, Bitwise Industries boasted an executive roster of 12 people with chief-level titles, plus 54 others with titles of vice president or senior vice president. Bitwise co-founders Soberall and Olguin were each earning salaries of $600,000 per year as co-CEOs, according to court documents.
Beyond health insurance and retirement saving plans, other Bitwise benefits raise eyebrows because they seem to be financially impractical for a company of Bitwise size and stage of development, like covering 100% of the vet bills for pets adopted by employees. Bitwise employee Jenn recalls her observations from within the company. Did you hear stories of people with little to no experience in the job that they were given being paid very high salaries because
Yes.
they were friends?
Yes. Yeah, people were talking about, like Irma's sister, she didn't really know real estate or anything. I did real estate for 12 years and I have a license I can renew, but it's just like, man, like I looked into getting into the real estate team, but they wouldn't even like look at it, and just because they're friends or they're Irma's girlfriend or whatever. And that's what we kept hearing, that, well, Irma's girlfriends get to be president or they get to be like COO, whoever, and making all this money that, I can't believe it. It's just ridiculous, That's one way to run your company to the ground.
Roger Bonactor has been a practicing attorney in Fresno for 18 years. His connection to the community and familiarity with Bitwise, while limited, stems from his interactions with various individuals associated with the company over the years.
I was astonished. I wasn't surprised. I was flabbergasted by some of the salaries and hourly incomes that were being paid. Mm-hmm. Now, I by no means, I value a hard day's work. But whatever it is you do, where you get up and you look yourself in the mirror and you know that you earned an honest living, God bless you. There is no qualitative difference to me to the janitor who shows up to go and do an underappreciated and unrecognized job, and the engineer. But you could not be paying people for that type of a job at those rates and have it make sense.
Yeah, it would come out. People would talk about it, and it's just like, oh, it sucks, And we would see it more and more, and just the imbalance of everything. And then it was when it was shown in like one of the court documents, they're like, oh my God, like so-and-so's making $300,000 and this other girl, 150, and and I was begging for a $5,000 raise.
But it wasn't just the hourly compensation or the salaries that were nutty. They had these weird programs. If you adopted a pet from a rescue, they would pay 100% of the veterinary bills. Now, I love animals. I donate to no-kill animal shelters. I think it's wonderful to want to encourage adoption of animals that are at risk of euthanization. I think that's a beautiful thing. You can't be handing out all these checks, 3,000 here, 2,000 there for vet bills, and expect your bottom line to make sense. I get it, Google does it, Facebook does it, all these publicly traded companies do it because they got this phony baloney stock market money that they're living off of. I get it. But if you're growing a small business, no mom and pop, no Joe's Donuts, no, Jane's Coffee can operate like that. You can't grow that like that if you're a regular business. So why Bitwise chose to operate as if it had already achieved as if it had already went public and it was sitting on a 9-figure valuation is beyond me.
The model of high salaries, good benefits, and rapid expansion across California and the U.S. hid warning signs of financial mismanagement, unrealistic hiring practices, and a lack of positive cash flow from its business operations. Instead of generating revenue from products or services, Bitwise's co-CEOs focused on raising money from investors and lenders based on a compelling vision of social impact through hiring and expansion. An FBI agent later characterized the process as an unsustainable Ponzi scheme, using new investments to cover old debts. Here's Will Dyke again.
It was an insatiable desire to hire people. And when there really was no reason that you needed to hire additional human capital, because there were no goods and services going out the door to sustain that. They weren't doing anything. It was, we're bringing people through the educational Geekwise Academy, and we're going to guarantee them employment, which meant Bitwise was going to hire them, but had nothing to do with them. So they came up with ridiculous titles and assigned them to things like, Director of Food and Beverage Bakersfield. There was a gal that had that title.
Here's Jake Soberall on Bitwise's nationwide plan for expansion.
Almost 9 years ago, we began the work of Bitwise Industries here in our hometown of Fresno, California, with the hope of serving our community and advancing our city. And over the course of that time span, not only have we gotten to do really extraordinary work here in Fresno, but we've gotten to see that work expand to places like Bakersfield, Merced, Oakland, and Toledo.
They never had a presence in Bakersfield other than a little co-working space. There was no business there, but they had 20 full-time staff. And that all played into the concept that, hey, we're this fast-growing company, we're doing all these great works, and if you invest in us, we're going to 10x like any venture capitalist wants. And that's why they attracted the dollars that they did, but there never was a good or a product that anybody wanted to back any of that. And so to stay in business, they had to keep raising money, but there was no business to invest in. So that's how things went sideways with cooking the books and everything else.
We surround our work with that of other tech and tech-enabled firms. And what this does is it creates benefit in 3 directions. For the student, from the very first moment you walk into class, you have access to an inspiring venue that you didn't expect to be for you or your city, to community, to belonging, and to professional opportunity. For the tech or tech-enabled company, you have ready access to the talent that historically you viewed as your barrier to growth in that geography. And then for the city, you have vitality on a street corner where there was formerly blight. That rooting this work in place is how the things of Bitwise work together to serve the cities that Bitwise calls home. And it couldn't be more important to the work that we do.
Any tech company is a house of cards. I mean, you got a 1 in 1,000 shot of ever being profitable in that arena. That's why I don't deal in it. If I need to gamble, I'll go to Vegas. Much better odds. They weren't on track to build a sustainable tech company. We have lots of ag tech companies in town. We have lots of sustainable tech companies that do all kinds of goods and services, but they restrain their growth, they restrain their hiring, they build out of positive cash flow, not on borrowed, super accelerated unicorn money. That's Silicon Valley, and that's not Fresno. And so that was the big red flag. It's like, okay, if you're going to invest the money in your good works projects, but not in growing the actual underlying business, you can only go as long as you can keep raising money. And when you can't raise money, you're out of business. Well, that's exactly what happened.
Quick Labs, a technology company founded by Damon Thomas and Curlin Phipps, was one of the earliest business tenets of Bitwise, expanding into larger spaces as Bitwise opened new buildings. Before long, as Bitwise began to shift its focus away from training in software coding and website development, QuickLabs became more involved in teaching those classes for Bitwise's GeekWise Academy. Here's Irma Oldwin from an interview with CNBC.
Once you see somebody from your community make it in the technology industry, you start to imagine what it might be like if you yourself went to a class and maybe earned a wage and found a job in the technology industry. So that is our best recruitment, is the student themselves. But of course, seeing yourself have, or somebody from your community have success, is really the driver. That is really what changes a person's mind about self-selecting into an industry.
Damon was initially hesitant to teach due to his expertise in front-end design rather than deeper back-end coding. But Irma Oldwin convinced him by emphasizing the importance of his teaching style. This led to successful classes that engaged students and improved retention. QuickLabs also taught adult classes and game design summer camps, contributing to Bitwise's educational programs.
They started getting contracts with teaching for the school district. And I remember Irma coming up to me and asking me to teach a web design class, teaching students how to code. I didn't understand why she wasn't asking Curlin, so in the beginning I was like, no, it doesn't make sense. Why are you asking me? Because I'm really a designer. I'm a marketing guy, and I design how things look and feel. When I said no at the beginning, then Irma said, you do this for a living. They're high school students. Just teach them what you know. I said some more words, and then at the end of the conversation, it was really about, we want you. We're not really just hiring a person with all this code experience. We're hiring you.
After some convincing, Damon Thomas accepted Irma's proposal to teach classes for Bitwise.
Because I make learning fun, and because I love video games, and I love graphic design and anime, all these things that I love, the retention was high and the completion level was high. And then we celebrated at the end, and it was fun. So the staff at Edison loved it. The students loved it. Some of the students are still connected with us at QuickLabs to this day. And then that success from everyone led them to wanting me to teach some of their night classes.
Okay.
So then
So that becomes sort of the adult classes. Sorry, some of what
exactly.
was the GeekWise class.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. So that worked out for me because I think it was from 6 to 9, something like that, in the evening. So I could still do everything we needed to do for QuickLabs during the day. So we were literally heroes for hire. That is our tagline. That's what we are when companies hire us to solve some of their technical problems and their marketing and idea and identity problems with their businesses. But we were contracted, and I taught the evening classes, and then eventually brought Curlin in to teach game.
Right, I think it was a summer camp?
Yeah. Game design summer camp.
QuickLabs Thomas and Phipps served as contractors for Bitwise rather than employees, which sometimes caused brand confusion in the community. Many people began to associate QuickLabs' work with Bitwise, leading to a blurring of lines between the two entities. Eventually, QuickLabs distanced itself from Bitwise to maintain its own brand identity.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you were contractors, so I guess technically it was Bitwise, but through a contractor teaching the classes. Was there a point at which that kind of changed?
If you're paying me to do a job, I want to do a job, and I'm going to do a great job. You're contracting me. I'm not an employee, but I'm still going to go in wearing your brand, wearing your everything. So when I taught under, GeekWise at the time, I wore GeekWise shirts. I did everything. So I went in, because they were paying me to service their customers. So I could see how over time, people in the city began to call us the Bitwise guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that we were doing, people thought it was Bitwise doing some of the things that we were doing as far as teaching the classes, and the things that we were doing outside of the classes as QuickLabs. We were doing our own software development, and we started the nonprofit Learn STEAM, and we were teaching minority youth and girls STEAM stuff, so science, technology, engineering, art, and math, multimedia. We were having all kinds of events. People were starting to think that those things were Bitwise. So at some point we stopped teaching for Bitwise and GeekWise, and as they started to grow and do more things, we decided that it was best for us to stop going to any of their events. We started at the same time they did and before they did. So I just, people didn't know.
Right.
So I'm going around the city and people are calling me the Bitwise guy.
Yeah.
And then I'm realizing my brand just got diluted.
Will Dyke, the developer who renovated 3 of Bitwise's buildings and was working on a 4th in Fresno, had big concerns over the company's expansion to markets in other states when its operations in California already appeared to be built on a shaky foundation.
Here's Irma Olguin again on the company's nationwide plans.
And so today we get to announce that we're going to 5 additional cities to bring Bitwise cities to a total of 10, moving into Greeley, Colorado, Buffalo, New York, El Paso, Texas, Las Cruces, New Mexico.
In the 2020s, 2021, 22, when they started expanding to Toledo and Las Cruces, and I think they were somewhere on the East Coast, like Philadelphia, they had a number of sites that were all over the place, and that was part of the growth and narrative that they were trying to portray.
Yeah.
And it looked really good on the website that we were doing business there. There really wasn't much of a business there. And people coming in as, directors of Bitwise Real Estate Global that had never worked a day in real estate in their life. That was like, wow, that was concerning, not just from the aspect of the people not being qualified to do the jobs, but they were building a very tight-knit C-suite that had each other's backs to perpetuate the narrative.
After Jenn was hired by Bitwise in 2020, she had some personal interaction with Bitwise leadership, particularly CEO Irma Olguin. Jenn initially admired Irma for her down-to-earth demeanor and felt a connection due to their similar Hispanic backgrounds. But as the COVID-19 pandemic waned and employees returned to the workplace, Jenn became increasingly uneasy, especially when Bitwise leaders talked about the possible sale of Bitwise and advised employees not to rely on the company over the long term.
I had this weird feeling, like we'd go to these all-team meetings and stuff, and we were actually coming to the office and everything. When Jake said he wants to sell Bitwise, and I'm like, what? Why do you guys want to sell? And I remember typing in, do you really mean you want to sell? He's like, absolutely, right away. And I'm like, well, I'm just getting used to you guys as CEOs. Like, so we'll have new CEOs. So I was very confused. Like, why do they want to sell if they're doing so well? Like, but now I see that they were trying to inflate the company when it really wasn't worth all of that. And they weren't really making all that money. And then, so hopefully someone will buy it for $50 million or whatever. And then they cash it. And then the other people are like, what just happened? Like, what did I buy? So there was that made me feel uneasy. And then also I remember Jake telling us that we should not rely on Bitwise. And I'm like, why is he telling us that? Like, that makes me feel really insecure that, like, what does he mean? Like, that we should be looking at other things and not just plan to stay on Bitwise till we retire. So then I felt like, does he mean this isn't going to last?
Something that wasn't widely known in Fresno is that while the Bitwise Industries name was displayed prominently on its 3 buildings, the company didn't actually own them. Instead, Bitwise was initially part of a partnership that owned the buildings and a tenant responsible for subleasing and collecting rents from other tenants, as well as for paying for taxes, insurance, and other building support costs. Will Dyke explains.
To my knowledge, Bitwise never owned outright any building that they ever occupied across the U.S. There were always third-party partners that usually put up almost all of the capital. And in our 4 Fresno buildings, we were joint venture partners. That's how we started out early on. And then by 2018, when I was leaving the board, it made sense that I bought them out of all the real estate in 2019 and then just became their landlord. And that was, in retrospect, a great decision because I'm not sucking into the middle of the bankruptcy, and I'm not a partner with a bankruptcy trustee. So we've been able to move very quickly and nimbly, re-tenant the buildings, secure the subtenants that were there, and here we are. We still have some vacancy, but at least the buildings are operational, and we didn't lose that asset at downtown Fresno.
And so you were able to cash out your investment?
It was the opposite. I bought out Bitwise.
Next on Bitwise and Betrayal, inside the fraud scandal that shook Fresno.
So I started Googling it, Bitwise, news story, whatever. And then I see David Taub from GB Wire interviewing Jake. I'm like, what is this? So I listened to the video. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're behind in rent. They're not paying the bills, this and that. What is going on? We're just about to move into that new building.
But there are plenty of good and decent people that start businesses and the businesses just don't work out. That's just economics. But it's a whole other thing to trample your employees on the way out. It was a cash flow issue. That's why they switched from automatic deposit to paper check. It bought them an extra few days of the money being in the account. And then by using a paper check instead of a third-party payroll provider, the deductions and withholdings wouldn't leave Bitwise's accounts.
Hundreds of employees are now without jobs and wondering what's next. That's after the tech incubator Bitwise Industries announced it is furloughing its entire workforce.
I'm Tim Sheehan.
And I'm Bob Rodriguez.
Bitwise and Betrayal, inside the fraud scandal that shook Fresno, is a product of the Fresno Bee, a McClatchy publication, based on original reporting by Tim Sheehan and Bob Rodriguez. It's produced by Lume Alisali, Samantha Sullivan, Bob Rodriguez, Tim Sheehan, Eric Zamora, and Craig Kohlruss. Executive producers Jennifer Molina and Don Blunt. The podcast was edited by Jenn Molina and Lume Alisali. Original music by Yves Buigues. Bitwise and Betrayal, inside the fraud scandal that shook Fresno, can be found on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube Music, or wherever you get your podcasts.